Great. So welcome everyone. This is going to be our final session today. Thank you everyone who has come and shown up and participated. I thought that maybe by beginning, Johnny and I would share what started this work, kind of what our intention was from the beginning. And I think it's twofold, at least for me, and I'll allow him to elaborate too. So for me, it was this idea of like, how do we explore self-reflection and writing and these anecdotal stories that we have and these personal experiences that we've gone through during this time of the coronavirus. And then how do we connect those stories to wider cultural, political, social meanings, consequences, and understanding. And so that was the first purpose. And the second purpose was really this idea that Johnny and I had talked about before the virus, is how friendship could be used as activism and how we can use friendship as activism and pull from ideas about belonging and tenderness and love. And Johnny, would you add any more to that?
Different type of movements and how interracial relationships around like freedom and liberation and how those are grounded in a certain type of mutual respect for each other. And then also a type of, as Whitney was talking about, a type of friendship. And as Whitney and I have developed different programming together, a part of the anchors are really a social justice, like seeing equity and justice as a very large framing of some of the work that we do personally and professionally. And then there's some type of like a commitment to like a human rights, which, you know, turn into one another in a time of collective grief and also a pandemic is what one of my favorite poets says is like, we actually have the consent to not being a single person. We actually have the consent in a way to being in relationship with community and doing that type of work. So we really tried to ground the work in a certain type of how we have like this circular conversation, and one that is not always like looking for who is right, but really saying that we want to create some theories of social change together and grounded in certain type of practice of relationship with one another. And really like this space is kind of taken a life of its own, ecosystem of its own with each other. So I'm excited to kind of like reflect on that piece. Like I didn't know it was going to get to this. Like you all could be, as we always say, like anywhere in the world right now. So you kind of like chose to kind of be here, eating your food, drinking your drinks, ready. And, you know, don't worry. Like I also got mine too. I got my Cheez-Its in my cup and my tea. I think that is a piece that's so important for Whitney and I, is to do community in a way that is beautiful, radical, and also justice oriented.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we have time at the end or even after, since this is like we're closing things out. If you want to share your reflections with us, like I'd be happy to meet with anyone or shoot an email. I know that there's exciting things coming, that Johnny has programmings coming up and I have new programs that are starting. So we'll definitely let you know of those other opportunities that might have a different focus. But we would love to have your voices because it's been really nice to just know all of you and to hear your contributions. Johnny, I'm going to let you go ahead and, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I love seeing kids so much. And then they pop in.
Oh, is
Hi.
there a kid? Oh, hi. I see you're on my other screen. Hi, buddy.
Sorry, Whitney. What were you saying?
No, I just wanted to know if you wanted to introduce our special speakers for today.
Oh man, yes. So I have had the opportunity and the pleasure of knowing Dr. Doyle for I want to say 5 years, something like that. Has it been 5 years? Yeah, something, give or take. And um, and inviting Dr. Doyle to this space and knowing particularly her scholarship around autoethnography, like autobiographical work in the context of community, and her work as like a community teacher, someone is very engaged in the action of like what it means to do education for freedom in the context of a community, trying to get both herself, her students in the high school classroom, and then also the college classroom to think of theories and practices that center justice. So in thinking about inviting Dr. Doyle to this space, I think it's such an exciting time, and asking Dr. Doyle and some of her amazing, radical, brilliant students to come to this space. It is something that is a pleasure to both Whitney and I. So today, Dr. Doyle is going to, alongside two of her amazing, radical, brilliant students, they're going to talk a little bit about a foundation in every civil rights movement, every justice movement, every abolitionist movement, every women's rights, gay rights, lesbian rights movement is an anchor of critical love. So without further ado, I would like to open up the space for, and I'm sorry, could both of Dr. Doyle's students, maybe 3 students, I don't know who's Patricia, just 2, could you give us your names as well? So yeah, this is your space now.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, so thank you for having us. That was a super great introduction. Yeah, also just Jen is fine. I don't really know who Dr. Doyle is. It sounds weird to me still. So yeah, but we came to this topic on critical love, just thinking through what it meant to center love in justice work, particularly what that could look like across different contexts. And so I kind of thought about it. Can I share my screen? Can I do that?
Yeah, let me give you permission. Okay, you should be able to now.
I should have asked that beforehand. It's not anything. Yeah, so it's not anything great. Oh, I can't see it. I'm learning still, y'all. Yeah, so we were talking about critical love in terms of critical love of self, critical love of others, and critical love of community, and the ways in which all 3 of these were inherently intertwined here. And so yeah, so speaking of autoethnography, we wanted to talk specifically about the word critical. And so I was going to introduce that. And then Jack and Morgan are who is here with me today. And they're going to share their stories with us. And then we'll kind of like pose some questions and open it up to the rest of the group. But we really wanted to mention this idea of critical because the critical orientation is important. And particularly a lot of my work does use critical autoethnography as well, but it's this tie from the personal to critical theory. And so there's this explicit focus on one's personal experience and then the structures that help create those experiences. So it's moving beyond just this happened to just me. It's like you're situating it within a larger context. And I think that's really important, particularly when we talk about doing any sort of like justice work, is figuring out how to decenter self and how to center community in ways that are particularly helpful and powerful. And so I'm trying to think here. Yes, so attempting to deconstruct the power structures that get exposed through it as well. And this was just my work for my dissertation work, but I'm going to give it up to Jack, I think is gonna share first, and he has some really powerful stories. We wanted to stick to this idea. I know you guys started the first session with the power of storytelling. And so, yeah, we wanted to stick to that theme. And so Jack is gonna share, and then Morgan is gonna share, and yeah, we'll just kind of move on from there.
Good.
All right. So with critical love, since I think last week when we first started talking about it, I've had so many different definitions and iterations in my head of what this looks like, of who it includes, which is everyone, and something that I've landed on very, very recently that I've just really value the perspective on is critical love of self. With critical, I think there are times where we think harsh or we think judgmental, but that's not what we mean by critical here. I think of critical almost as life-saving. And we can see through our actions through critical love and our own experiences that this truly is life-saving for many people. So there's two quotes that I'm going to bring up at different points in my story, but I'm going to talk about critical self-love in my experiences. I grew up and growing, I'm 21, I don't think I'm an adult that much, but I grew up in the South. I'm in South Carolina, and I was like the poster boy at my church. I knew all the Bible verses. I knew all the stories. I knew all the elders. I became a deacon in my church at like 15 years old. And I sat in boring meetings where kids were supposed to not be there. And I was there, and they wanted me to like take up space. And I found out just through self-discovery around the time I was 16 that I'm queer. And my church has a very complicated relationship where it's kind of like, just leave it up to the congregations. They can decide if they want to accept it or not. And my congregation accepted me. I came out in a blog post because that's just how I had to. And I had such a great reaction from so many different people in my church. My pastor was like, heck yeah, he was on board. And that is a very fortunate story in the South, in America, in so many different places. To have that community that I grew up with and grew in still love me. And at school, in high school, I was also the president of FCA, which is Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I came out during the summertime, kind of like August, just before school went back into session. And we had a planning meeting before, and I had not come out before that meeting. So school starts, FCA doesn't start immediately. We start probably 3 or 4 weeks in. And then I was asked by the teacher, it's a student-led organization that has to have a teacher sponsor. So I was asked by my teacher, who actually went to my church, if he could sit down with me and my parents after church one Sunday. And I knew immediately what this meant. I was like, I'm about to get kicked out. And I was preparing myself. My mom was very upset, and she was preparing herself because she, as moms here will know, want to protect you, but she doesn't have experience with this. She doesn't know how. So it was just very complicated. And I remember in that meeting, I can like see the room so clearly still. We sat down, and the teacher was like, FCA says they're not going to hold meetings unless you step down as president of FCA. And I was like, can I still go? And they were like, yeah. I was like, okay, I sat down. I don't care. The thing was, I signed a sexual purity statement, and it didn't agree. I didn't agree with it. FCA's definition of what it meant and mine were two different things. So I just said, you know what, fine, I'll remove myself from this situation and I'll figure it out. And I figured I could talk my way back into it later. And that was not the case. So ultimately, I left FCA, which I'm going to now pull up a quote on my phone. I'm not texting. It just really reminded me of this. And it's an Audre Lorde quote because we love Audre Lorde. Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. In that moment, I remember thinking, I don't really care about FCA at this point. I was like, they're not who I thought they were. I know that's not what I think. They're not dead to me in like a mean sense, but like, that's not where I'm at. That's not my home. So I was like, this isn't about me. This is about queer kids. What if I didn't have such a good support system? What if I didn't have such a good community? What are the effects then of the high school student? I had chosen a bunch of students to join me on the board, the student board of FCA, and of the 7 of them, 5 of them left with me. And that was like, I remember my heart being so full from that. I was like, how can y'all do this? Like, this isn't even about y'all. And it showed that critical love. And again, like I said, that got me thinking about students who wouldn't have had the support system I had. So it kind of, I didn't think of myself as a martyr, but I thought of myself as like, this is what we're not going to do. We're not going to allow that to happen at this school and let it stand. So that's why I left. I didn't want to be a part of it, didn't want my name on it. And that also for me wouldn't have allowed me to go back to that meeting and not participate as a leadership, in a leadership role. So then from then on, my church was like, no, we don't care about FCA anymore, go ahead. But there was this big lack of affirming coming from the church. It was almost as if you're safe, you're different. You're not like those other queer people. You're the exception. And we can find this in so many communities that we excuse who they are because they're the exception. They're white enough, they're straight enough, they're masculine enough, whatever it is. Which brings me to the second quote that'll wrap up this story. In all honesty, I didn't have a falling out with my church after that, but as I've approached away from it, again, I think in the name of self-care and what I think of as critical love is this quote from Nina Simone: "You've got to learn to leave the table when love is no longer being served." Love for me in these situations needs to look like advocacy for me, for people like me, for people not like me. I couldn't be the exception. I needed to be like everyone else, if that makes sense. So that's just my story about how critical love definitely has self-care has room in critical love. You hear all these things from people trying to sell you something. Once you have this, you'll be good. Once you have this, you'll be full. And honestly, we know what we need. So yeah, thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, that is really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing, Jack. I want to, and Dr. Doyle will chime in. Is there anyone that wants to reflect before we move on? There's so much stuff that's going to my mind, but I want to give a chance for others to respond to Jack's story.
I just want to say thank you for sharing your story. I think it's very powerful. I identify as United Methodist, and I'm sure you've seen in the news, there's a lot of controversy over that right now. And with the United Methodist Church and the LGBTQ plus community, and something that I've kind of been very proud of and kind of been able to get involved in is both of our pastors believe that people that identify as LGBTQ plus belong in our church and are welcome in our church. And, you know, I believe God loves everybody, no matter who you are, that whether you believe that or not, your own business. But I just have been very grateful that they both take opportunities to educate our congregation and make it a very welcoming place. And I hope that one day other communities in the United Methodist Church can get to that point too. And it was funny because Johnny and I were just having a conversation yesterday, and I said, I feel like there's so many simple things in life, like, you know, don't be racist, don't be homophobic, just be a good person, you know, be kind. So thank you for sharing. That was incredible, and I really appreciated that.
Definitely. I did want to react to Jack. Wow. I'm taking notes too, because I also am a constant student of other folks. And I like the things you actually reclaim queer of color and Black queer ancestors that are a part of who you are. So I think that's so powerful. When you particularly you're talking about like Audre Lorde and Nina Simone, I think of like the Black feminist ethic of care that whether you know it or you don't know it, when you reclaim that, you reclaim a sense of connection. What you talk about is that critical love to self-care, which is so key to allowing lesbian, gay, trans, bisexual, poly folks who are on the margins a lot of times when we're thinking about what it means to be human. So it's both anchoring your own humanization and then also reclaiming ancestors who are a part of your community, and then this futuristic way that you imagine the church, right? Like you're imagining also teacher education too, and any queer kids, lesbian kids, gay kids, trans kids that you might teach in the future, to open up a space for them to understand that critical love and critical self-care is what Audre Lorde says, a political warfare, but it's actually rooted and steeped in love. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I had to do the teacher pause wait time. It always feels really awkward. But yeah, no, I thank you so much, Jack, for sharing your story. I think that yeah, I have a million things that I want to say, but I'm not going to take up too much space in here. So I'm going to give it away to Morgan, and she's going to share a little bit with us. And again, we'll kind of give time for folks to reflect and share as well.
All right. Hey, I'm Morgan. I've been here the past few times, but I actually wrote a poem about kind of where I'm at with critical love right now. And it starts, when love is not a virtue, but an action, with waiting rooms packed and doctors treat with intention and do not mention how much their patient meant to them, but how they will attend to them. Their batters, their bruises, however patients or however doctors do not always choose if a patient lives or dies. When conditions are critical, we do not wait for miracles, and love can be difficult to give when the future is unpredictable. But doctors do not love their patients like the ones patiently waiting for relief, so they must debrief how they loved their sons and daughters, their mothers and fathers, but they are still left with the question how it would have ended if they had been in the doctor's care sooner. And so kind of just as a blanket statement, I did not this was definitely not even gonna lie, I was in the bathtub and grabbed my phone. I was like, I need to word vomit this right now. But upon reading back on it throughout the week, I was kind of hesitant on sharing it because it definitely can read sometimes we think through critical love we need to save people, and that's not what I'm trying to preach at all. Not really trying to preach anything. That's not why I'm here. But kind of, I based that poem off of a Martin Luther King quote that I found that says, "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and that love without power is sentimental and anemic." And that poem kind of just reflected in my own experience with critical love, kind of finding my role within it. Whether I'm the doctor or the person in the waiting room, those are very different kinds of love that you can give to someone, where and just kind of navigating that and being okay with whatever position or whatever stance I'm in. And also just recognizing that power and love don't work in a contradictory manner, but instead need to work together simultaneously. Because if your power is not led with love, then it only contributes to others' problems or your own problems, and it becomes cyclical. And I kind of thought of this in the sense of as a girl or a woman or anything like that. I've noticed, I've done a lot of reflecting recently with all this free time, but I've noticed how, as I've transitioned into college, how I used to make myself really small, and whatever love was always a cutesy thing to me. And I love to love, and I love to be positive and to give that atmosphere to a room. And for so long I was like, oh, Morgan, you need to be more assertive. You can't act like that in a teaching setting or a classroom setting, because love isn't love is cute. Love isn't, it's an additional thing. And so kind of reframing that love as an empowering thing for me and for others, and maybe trying to be more assertive and not trying to take up a little bit of space, but rather letting my love fill the room. So that's kind of how I've approached critical love.
I'm trying to do the teacher thing too, but I'm just so excited because Morgan, your poem was so beautiful. And I would love to have a copy of that if you wouldn't mind sharing it afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have never heard that quote before from Dr. King, and I'm so glad you shared it. I'm going to repeat it back because it gave me goosebumps, and it also just made me feel that's it. That's it. So he says, power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. I really like that. I feel like I'm like was thinking about relationships I've had where I felt the power that was reckless and abusive, and I didn't feel that love. And you can feel when love is absent. It feels reckless. It feels like it interrupts you, and it feels aggressive. And just like I was talking to Jen earlier this week about having, when things are named, how healing that is. And that quote that you offered in the poem you offered helped name some things that I've been feeling, and it's very healing. So thank you so much.
I also, sorry, look, I tried to wait so long, y'all. Normally I try to count to 20, but no, I also wanted to bring up when we talk about power, Audre Lorde's been talking to, I talked to Hannah about it earlier, I talked to Johnny about it, but her uses of power, or no, power is the erotic. What is it? Uses of the erotic? Erotic is power? Yes. Yeah, actually, let me just get in here. Yeah, but this idea of like power, this source of power like within ourselves, and having power to instead of power over someone, and so that our power doesn't come from taking power away from others, but that it comes from us inherently. And so yeah, that's just something I've been pondering and that I was thinking of when you were talking, Whitney. And there was, yeah, there's like a million. I'm gonna let other people share with Morgan because I shared with her already. That's fine. We can sit in awkward silence too. Used to it. But yeah, we have a lot of, also, I keep on forgetting to return to the chat box. You can ask my students. I'm horrible. Like, I can't multitask. Let's see here. Whitney was talking about, in relation to Jack, says the only thing I was thinking about, Jack, is your friends who thought of you as the exception. It reminded me that our goodwill or intention isn't enough to end inequity. Other thing, not the only thing. Yeah, and I think, Whitney, you bring up an excellent point here about intentionality. So I always think of, yeah, like my intentions can be good all day, right? Like I truly always have the best intentions, but my actions, sometimes they do not align with those intentions. And particularly when it comes to racial justice work, I feel like we sometimes need to redefine what that can look like, and thinking about our good intentions don't really matter. Like I can intend to make $1 million, but if I go to the bank and I'm like, I have this intention of $1 million, they are not going to cash that, y'all. And so, yeah, just thinking of how we can deliberately align our actions through this lens of love, right? I think that we need to center love in all of this too. But I think that's an excellent point. And then Jenna said, Lizzie and I were just talking about this the other day. I'm assuming that was from Morgan. Was it? Can y'all share a little bit about that?
When Morgan was talking about like how sometimes like she takes up less space, and why that is, I find myself in that position a lot when I am working with people who have like some sort of authority over me. I just so desperately would rather be liked than really anything else. And that has been something that I've tried to be like more aware of, so that when I find myself in a situation where I am just maybe saying things to please someone else rather than saying the things that I truly feel and truly believe, and being aware of the fact that, oh, like I've been conditioned as a woman to act in this way. So I think that honestly, just being aware of that is my inclination and that is my tendency when I'm in those situations has been huge for me, because I can kind of like catch myself in the act when it's happening, and then kind of flip the switch and think about like what are my goals for that conversation? Like what do I want that outcome to be? Because if I'm just nodding my head politely and saying, yeah, that's great, that's wonderful, that sounds good, like I'm never like I've just consented to never ever being a part of the conversation and never ever allowing my voice to be heard and for it to be able to possibly make change in areas at work, at school, you know, wherever that might be.
Kind of going off what Jenna said, I had to read a book, Fierce Conversations, for my class. It's a great book. I highly recommend it, even though I hated it the first 4 chapters. It turned out really great. But it taught me that every conversation is with yourself, and sometimes they include people. So I feel like I've really taken the mindset of, is this conversation I'm having, whether it does involve someone or just myself, is that pleasing to me or not? Because I agree, a lot of times as women, I think we're kind of almost put in the corner, and it's like nobody puts baby in the corner. And I think really finding your voice now is so important. And Jenna's done a lot with me. She's a couple years older, but just really giving me a chance and showing me how important it is to use your voice and to believe in it and be powerful with it. And just small things you can speak out against that you don't agree with, or things you do believe in that you can speak against or about, really can change policies and the way people view things. So I commend you for realizing that now.
Me too. Yeah, these are things I did not know when I was, are you a sophomore in undergrad right now, Morgan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, things I did not know in undergrad at all. And also things, right, like I'm 32 now, like also things that I still am learning currently. And so I like to think, Lizzie, thank you for bringing up that the importance of having fierce conversations with others, because particularly when it comes to social justice work, sometimes our silence is consenting to, you're agreeing to whatever that other person said. And if you're not interrupting it, then essentially, like, what are you consenting to here? And trusting your own voice, I think, is part of it as well. And it's, I also was thinking, Jenna, when you were sharing, was this idea of setting our own boundaries, like respecting our own boundaries. I had this conversation with myself. I had a whole little come to Jesus moment with myself last week. Like, I can't be mad at other people for not respecting my boundaries if I myself am not respecting my boundaries. Like, I teach people how to treat me, right? Every single day with every single interaction. And so thinking through what that might look like, and just being mindful of that. But I think it's important that we have these fierce conversations, particularly when it comes to social justice work. Is it's knowing when to listen, right? Because we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. But then it's also knowing when you really need to speak up. And so, I'd like thinking about that through the lens of consent as well, and this idea of silencing. Thank you guys.
I think another point to this that I'd like to kind of take some of what Jack said about the self-care bit, and then Morgan talking about your own voice. I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown, and my favorite all-time quote, and it just is in my brain ever present, is talk to yourself as though you're talking to someone you love. And I think we have a tendency, women perhaps more than men, I'm not sure, to criticize ourselves, be very self-critical. Any of us that might be on that spectrum of perfectionism certainly knows what that feels like. And so I really take that quote to heart, and it's been very, very helpful to me when I get into that voice that's criticizing me, and I say, whoa, hey, let's not, how would you say this to someone that you loved? And I think that's an important piece in addition to the other ways we are heard and voice ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. Thank you for sharing that, because sometimes I always tell people to be gentle with themselves, and I literally tell myself this in my head every day, but I am just not gentle with myself. And this important, speak to yourself as if you are someone that you love. And I was thinking too, as you were talking, this idea of critical love being a both and. So as I was pondering critical love in regards to my dissertation, I was writing I was thinking of critical love as like accountability also, and making sure that it's not enabling. It's, I love you so much that I don't want to watch you like kill yourself or be detriment, or, you know, do these things, these harming things. But, you know, how do we go about saying that in a way that's loving, in a way that's caring? And I had a quote, and I'm probably not going to be able to find it right at this second. So I'm going to let someone else talk, and then I'm going to find it.
To that point, Jen, when you're talking about critical love as accountability, and kind of taking into account what Marion is talking about, this idea of critical love as harm reductive, and living in an environment that is racist and sexist and homophobic in different ways. I keep thinking about how some of our job as people who care about ourselves and other folks and care about the planet is putting out the most healing centered work. So like taking into acknowledgement that many of us who grow up in a very like anti-Black racist environment that contributes to whatever adverse experiences we have, that harm is a part of the very nature of the system, or the very nature of being in a system. For those that grow up in a system that is very sexist, just inherently to what the system is, like as we do the work, I hear so many times that educators are talking about adverse childhood experiences, but almost get trapped up in the trauma and not always anchoring in the healing centered work that where we can continue to grow in a way. And so like when Marion, when you were talking about Brene Brown's quote, talk to yourself although you are talking to someone that you love, I think about how my relationship with my mom, this amazing Black woman, used to be a Black girl from the South, and some of the things that we talk through positive self-talk, and how that is healing centered in a way, and trying to produce the most harm reductive environment that we can.
I love that you bring this up, Johnny, because it was kind of the thing I was hearing, listening to other women talk about, like the self-hatred that they feel is, I kept thinking about Malcolm X and his speech on Who Taught You to Hate Yourself. And he talks about that the most disrespected woman in America is the Black woman, and the most unprotected person in America is the Black woman, and the most neglected person in America is the Black woman. And so really, like, all these fears that we had that weren't inadequate, that were not perfect, the root of it is white supremacy culture. And that's, I think, what helps me when I feel like I'm not good enough, when I feel like I have to be urgent in my responses, that my worth is tied to productivity. Like, those are just lies from white supremacy and capitalism and patriarchy. And so I love what you say, Johnny, about harm is the system. And recognizing that, for me, it helps me feel liberated. Like, this is not about me. This was designed to bring people down, particularly women, and Black women in particular, and Black Indigenous people of color.
I'm marinating in all of the really great and important things that came up through the stories as well as the conversation. I reflect all the time that I wish that I could have had as much of a loving relationship with myself at 21, or even have had that kind of critical mindset. And so and I feel like that's been a lack of good education, not just in formal settings, but even in like family systems or whatever communities I was a part of. But it's actually been through some powerful mentors in graduate programs who have been women who also gave me that permission to do some of that liberatory self-reflective work. So I'm linking everything that you all have said back to the process of learning and unlearning and relearning, as well as teaching others. Like, I feel really empowered to have heard some of those stories today, because it gives me hope that perhaps in my future work I can work with young people to help facilitate this critically loving perspective and way of life. So thank you all. I'm thinking about all of these things, and I'll probably think about them the rest of the week.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. That was incredibly powerful. I just want to second that, because yeah, I don't think I knew until like this year, like that, like care is a thing. Like you can, oh, like I'm supposed to know what that. Yeah, no clue, no idea, never even thought about it. And we often, we, particularly women, take care of others so much. Teachers, we take care of others so much. I think we are all in this space because we take care of others. We're turning to one another right now, right? And so what does it look like to take care of yourself? And the importance of that, honestly. And Jenna, you said I didn't know I was supposed to care about myself this deeply. Yeah, me either. Yeah, like I wrote in the pleasure activism book, in the Care is Pleasure one, I was like, in case no one ever told you it's okay to have needs, express those needs and admit you need to be cared for. It's love, it's human. Like, yeah, no, I wrote that. That was for me because no one ever told me that. And like, yeah, I was 8 years old. And so I just think about that. And then I think very deeply all the time about disrupting things generationally. And so I've analyzed like different ways in which my grandmother and my mother and I are all very similar. And then the ways in which I don't have any kids yet, but the students that I teach, I adopt children all the time. They're not children usually, but I just adopt people all the time. And so thinking about what that can look like for each generation. I remember my mom said to me one time that she said one of the things she loved most was that I got it before she did. Like, she was like, I didn't know some of these things. So I'm like, oh, well, I'm over here like, well, I didn't get it. And so whenever I talk to I call her my little cousin. She's turning 22 next week, so she hates when I call her that. But I tell my little cousin all the time, I'm like, yeah, you get some things at a way sooner age. And I'm just always really appreciative of that, and just the way in which we're able to kind of get better every generation.
I think it's an evolution, and looking at all your faces, I am without a doubt could be your mothers and grandmothers probably, but it took me a long time, and it gives me hope to hear and see the depth that comes from you all and hear what you have to say. And it's so refreshing and encouraging. I have to think how old my kids are. Let's just say they're 32 and 36, because that's pretty close. So they're probably within range here. And yeah, they know, they get it so much more than I ever did at their age. And I think, and I'm not trying to simplify it, but I know that for me, the word selfish, it took me, you don't even want to know how I was much older than you guys are now before I understood that the word selfish wasn't a negative connotation in every aspect. It took a long time, and that's not to simplify that it just goes down to that word that is so ingrained in us, but what that does to us, that message, that tape that plays over and over, and you know, we're all about serving. I was raised Catholic, so that should explain a lot. But serving others, that's what you're about. You're a selfless person that serves others, so it makes you a shell. who are you? What are you? When do you find out who you really are as a human being? And what are my needs? And, oh, I have needs. Oh, no, I can't do that, until I finally realized it's really okay. And you're just making a mess of yourself if you don't take care of yourself. So I applaud you all and thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna second that Catholic one, because yeah, Catholic guilt is real too. Like, just we could have a whole nother conversation about that. But Whitney put in the chat box, well, Jack, I'm trying to read up, sorry, y'all. Can't pour out of an empty bucket, is what Jack said. And then Whitney said, we often think about trauma across generations, but what about healing across generations? My daughter is picking up where I leave off, I pick up where my mother left off, etc. And I know Whitney and I have had conversations about this recently. And I even think about it healing with my grandmother. So she's 87, and we have all kinds of feminist conversations. Like, when I tell you I'm trying to turn my grandma into a little feminist, like, I just, yeah. And she talks about, I just feel so liberated. I'm like, I know you got that word from me. I love it. And so, but it's really, I think that there's a way to do it. It doesn't have to just move in one direction, right? Like, it can move in all of these different ways. And I think that's what's really, really beautiful. And then I'm trying to read the chat box here. Sorry, y'all, my eyes. Yeah, Lizzie said you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Absolutely. Yeah, this idea that I got a quote one time when I was teaching. It was like my first year teaching. It was like, a teacher's like a candle. It lights itself to like light the way for others. And I'm like, why do I have to dwindle down to like this? Like, that's not sustainable, right? I've just been thinking really deeply about this word sustainable lately. And Jenna said, I've had a few students come out to me this year, and my initial reaction, embarrassed to admit, was jealousy. I wish I would have known myself and explored myself at a much younger age. Yes, facts, me too. Sometimes it feels like a missed opportunity. Yeah, I'm gonna like all the way second that. Yeah, sometimes it's like, man, I wish, because I mean, you can't go back in time, but I guess, you know, you can start from wherever. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Other thoughts?
Just while we kind of talk about what we learn, and like, imagine the students that will have, like, I think of my future students knowing now the benefit of speaking words of encouragement and like filling them up, like, you can do that. You are worthy of love. You can take up space, especially for students. I had to watch a professional development session for a fellowship that me and Morgan are in this past week. And I was talking about the importance of filling young boys of color with these, because there's so many narratives about them that are louder than the truth that they don't get to, that they have to internalize. So it's just like, I don't want to say excitement's the right word, but like the joy and anticipation of being able to tell students, like, hey, just like give them that little bit of information, see what they can do with it instead of what they can do underneath that harmful narrative they're given, is like unimaginable joy I can imagine.
That candle quote, the one about teaching, a good teacher lights a candle to make the way for others. I had that quote on my teaching pamphlet that I left with after I interviewed when I first got it. And now I'm just like, what? No wonder I was so burnt out for years, because I thought that's what was making me a good teacher. And I feel like I notice in certain professions, like caretaking professions especially, and even just like in the profession of being a mother, it is self-sacrifice is so valued. Like, you see all of these teaching videos that are going viral. Some of them I'm like, yeah, that's wonderful and that's nice, but like, what did this teacher sacrifice? You know what I mean? Like, what did they take from themselves to create this viral moment, whether or not that was their intention of it? And I feel like over the past couple of years, I've tried to really take note of that, and to really, stick to my office hours and have a cutoff time for emails and text messages and things like that. And I have noticed that other teachers don't really like that. Like they look at it as like, I'm not as dedicated, I'm not as good. And so that has been incredibly challenging. And it just makes me think, like, what do we need to do as educators to shift that focus and that misconception that if you, as an educator, as a caretaker, as a woman, as a mother, if you are willing to sacrifice every bit of yourself, then that makes you good at your job, whatever that may be.
Yeah, Jenna, what you're talking about kind of reminds me of, like, I feel like in this time we're telling everyone that, like, you're enough, and we're telling everyone, like, just take time for you. And even though, like, these are really good positive messages, and it's true, like, being enough is true, like, everyone was created to do amazing things, but the doing enough part might not be true. We might be coddling the people that have always been comfortable and actually don't need to rest. They've been resting. And I was listening to this Instagram, her name's Beck's Life, and she's really good to follow. And she just talks about, like, how a lot of white people right now are complaining, like, I can't even go outside without being afraid of being arrested. And it's like, okay, this is the reality of a lot of Black men in society. And so I've just been thinking about, when you talked about the viral messages and knowing the difference between being enough and doing enough, and that the purpose of our rest is so that we can create change in the world.
And going off of that, like Jen said, like the word intentionality, and not super related, but I just turned in an essay, and the professor wrote back, the amount of times you use the word intentionality throughout this essay, and I was like, yeah, I didn't reread that, but no, just like that point of, like, sometimes you need to be more, like, intentional with, like, the time slot you've been given, rather than just, like, continuously giving, like, that mediocre effort. Because I know, like, especially with, like, school the past few weeks, like, I thrive when I'm like, okay, Morgan, you have 30 minutes to, like, do this assignment, work for the whole 30 minutes, don't look at your phone, and then you can rest. And rather than just, like, kind of feeling like you're half on all the time, like, it's so draining. And just, like, connecting that to, like, critical love, like, we always talk about how, like, you have to love yourself to, like, be able to, like, pour into other people and all that. And it's just, like, also I've just kind of viewed, like, critical love as, like, being uncomfortable, and this is another conversation me and Jen have had, but, like, just, like, kind of, like, letting yourself sit in discomfort can be critical love, because, like I was saying before, critical love isn't always, like, being gentle with yourself and, like, kind of giving yourself a break. It can also be like, girl, like, you've been doing some pretty controversial stuff, like, you need to be better for yourself and, like, show up for yourself. And like, an example is, like, I work at a catering company, and we're all women. It's like 7 or 8 of us, and I'm 19, and the rest of them are 40 and up. And the amount of times I hear the word sorry said in, like, one work session, which is, like, 4 hours, is absolutely ridiculous. And I'm part of it too. Like, I'm always saying sorry, like, if I'm in their way, but it's also, like, just kind of, like, being rough with myself. Like, every time I say sorry, I'm like, girl, say excuse me, not sorry. Like, kind of, like, being careful with the words, like, and being intentional with what you're saying, rather than just, like, contributing to the cycle of what you've been told to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was just over here. I was taking notes as you were talking. I'm trying to. Patrice said, setting those professional boundaries, such as office times, might annoy other teachers, but I'm inspired by what you're teaching your students. They can learn from your example. And honestly, yes. Like, I tend to think of it like other people are just jealous because they don't have the balls to say no, you know. I say that, but I don't ever turn off. Being present in the moment, and then being half on all the time. Whitney agreed with that. And Hannah said at Patrice, I completely agree. It's groundbreaking. Oh, it moved. It might take a little more effort to model this, but it's healthier, perhaps for you. And I think about too all of the ways in which, again, I think very deeply, or I have been thinking very deeply about my mom and the ways in which I learned as a child that like the world didn't revolve around me. So and teaching like all of my critical love stories were about my mom and like her holding me accountable for things when I needed to be held accountable for things. And so yeah, and then what that taught me that when I didn't just get what I wanted every single time. Reframing your language. And Hannah said some therapeutic frameworks ask for behavioral change in language in order to change the mindset, and it can prove useful in most instances. And I actually I go back and I write against myself. So I'll even go into like old, I use it as a methodology in my dissertation, but I even do it in like my regular journal. I go back and I'm like, that was a harmful mindset. Like, let's interrupt that. And so I think that the more we think about ways to interrupt our logic and ways that we can reframe our thinking, I think the healthier we feel mentally and the more that we're able to give to others because we're giving to ourselves as well. Yes, but it has to be intentional, like Hannah said, yeah. So I had one last thing I was going to share in regards to, because I know we're at 158, to critical love. And it was, so I wrote, critical love is owning all of your beauty and greatness, knowing that both beauty and ugly exist within you always at the same time, this idea of both and. Owning all of your shit, knowing that you are the shit simultaneously. And I'll leave it open for whoever, we have a minute left.
I love that last line. I think that's like a really good, and we were planning, I was talking about like benedictions, like Jack, I was like raised religiously and like the pastor would always have like a benediction, like go out and do this. And so I like when you're talking about that, like to me, the benediction for us leading this series is like to go out, to lead with critical love, to interrupt the structures that condition our mindset and really think critically of like decentering self and centering community in the spaces we're all in.
Yeah, I would second that, decentering self and centering community and what it looks like to be in critical, creative community with one another. So I thank you guys for sharing with us.
Johnny, as we wrap up this series, do you have anything that you want to say as we close or any kind of next step that you would add? Oh, hold on. You might be muted. 1 second.
Let me see.
Gotcha.
Ooh, that's all I can say right now. It's like, woo, just, I feel very fortunate and honored to be with y'all. This series was really about coming together in a time of such collective grief. In this time, I lost my grandfather last week, a week and a half ago, to COVID-19. And I also have my father who's incarcerated and also has COVID-19. So I think about those like big historical and personal and cultural figures in my life and the type of sustenance that they provide to me as a person and humanizing me and constructing who I am. And I think that this time today with Jen and Morgan and Jack particularly as a way that we can sail with one another going forth and thinking about how critical love and healing and self and community care can sustain our work and whether that's personal or professionally. So I really feel a deep sense of can't nobody fuck with me in a way, like that type of thing, but also a deep sense of care for you all. So I hope that we can stay in contact in a way, whether it's just through email, or Facebook, or exchange and Google documented information, that type of thing, because this has been really a deeply healing space for me as a person, me as a Black person, as a Black community member, as a Black man who's at the margins, but also at the center of a lot of different things. So I really appreciate y'all, and I love y'all deeply. So thank you for just like holding space. Thank you for holding space. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's it now.